The rifle scope trembled for just a heartbeat before steadying into perfect stillness. Through the glass, a target moved at impossible speed through a maze of concrete and steel that would challenge even the laws of physics themselves. The wind howled at 20 miles per hour, creating variables that no computer could calculate, no training manual could prepare for. Every eye in the facility was fixed on one woman, waiting for her to attempt what 3 decades of elite marksmen had declared utterly impossible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But Lisa Chen had learned long ago that impossible was just another word for untested. The crowd held its breath as her finger found the trigger, and in that moment, the ghost of Staff Sergeant Lisa Martinez stirred from 3 years of carefully constructed sleep. What happened next would shatter more than just records. It would break open a truth that powerful men had spent years trying to bury, and prove that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the rifle but the person holding it. The morning mist clung to Fort Braxton like secrets to a soldier's chest, and Lisa Chen preferred it that way. At 5:30, when the North Carolina air still carried the cool promise of dawn, she could move through the Advanced Combat Training Center without the weight of curious stares or whispered conversations that followed her during daylight hours. Her work boots struck the concrete with measured precision, each step echoing through empty corridors that would soon buzz with the controlled chaos of military training. The equipment maintenance shed sat tucked between the main armory and the vehicle depot, a forgotten corner of the base where broken things went to be fixed or discarded. Lisa had claimed this territory 3 years ago when she'd arrived at Fort Braxton with falsified credentials and a carefully constructed story about seeking a fresh start after medical discharge. The official records showed Lisa Chen, former Army mechanic, competent enough for basic equipment maintenance but unremarkable in every way that mattered to military hierarchy. What those records didn't show was that Lisa Chen had once been Staff Sergeant Lisa Martinez, one of the most precise marksmen in Delta Force history, capable of threading bullets through spaces that defied mathematical probability. The woman who had earned the nickname Physics among her teammates for her ability to make shots that seemed to bend the laws of nature itself. That woman had died 3 years ago in a courthouse in Virginia, stripped of rank and honor by men who chose convenience over truth. Now Lisa Chen lived in her shadow, repairing scopes and cleaning rifle barrels for soldiers who possessed a fraction of her skill but carried themselves with the confidence that came from never having their world destroyed by betrayal. She had perfected the art of invisibility, becoming another piece of equipment in a facility designed to create America's deadliest warriors. The shed's interior reflected her current existence, functional, organized, and utterly without personality. Workbenches lined the walls, each one precisely arranged with tools that could disassemble and rebuild any weapon system used by modern special forces. Above them, pegboards displayed spare parts and components in neat rows that would make a supply sergeant weep with joy. Lisa's workspace occupied the far corner beneath a window that offered a clear view of the 1,000-yard precision rifle range, where Fort Braxton's elite units honed their marksmanship skill. She had positioned herself there deliberately, close enough to observe the training that she was forever barred from participating in, far enough away to avoid drawing attention from instructors who might recognize expertise they couldn't explain. Through that window, she had watched 3 years of soldiers attempt shots that she could make in her sleep, maintaining the careful mask of professional interest that befitted a maintenance technician with a healthy curiosity about the weapons she serviced. This morning brought familiar sounds from the range, the sharp crack of high-powered rifles, the metallic ping of bullets striking steel targets, and the occasional curse from marksmen who discovered that paper qualifications meant little when wind and distance conspired against them. Lisa allowed herself a moment to listen before turning to the day's first task, a customized rifle scope that had been returned with complaints about inconsistent zero retention. The scope belonged to Master Sergeant Tom Bradley, one of the few people at Fort Braxton who treated her with anything approaching respect. Bradley was old-school military, a veteran of Desert Storm and Afghanistan who had earned his rank through competence rather than political maneuvering. His weathered face carried the map of 30 years in special operations, and his eyes held the steady focus of someone who had seen enough combat to appreciate technical expertise wherever he found it. Lisa dismantled the scope with practiced efficiency, her fingers moving with the kind of muscle memory that came from thousands of hours working with precision instruments. The problem revealed itself quickly: microscopic wear in the adjustment mechanisms that would cause point-of-impact shifts under sustained use. It was the kind of subtle flaw that lesser technicians might miss, but Lisa's training had taught her to find imperfections that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. As she worked, voices from the range grew louder, carrying the distinctive tone of conflict brewing. Through the window, she could see a cluster of soldiers gathered around the firing line, their body language suggesting an argument in progress. Lisa recognized most of the faces, members of the 7th Special Forces Group who used Fort Braxton for advanced training rotation. At the center of the group stood Captain Jake Harrison, a rising star in Army Special Operations, whose confidence exceeded his actual abilities by a considerable margin. Harrison represented everything that was wrong with the modern military's promotion system. Harvard-educated and politically connected, he had fast-tracked through Ranger School and Special Forces qualification on the strength of family influence rather than demonstrated competence. His record looked impressive on paper: high test scores, glowing evaluations from commanders who valued connections over character, and a carefully cultivated image as the future of American special operations. What Harrison lacked was the kind of hard-earned wisdom that came from actual combat experience. His deployments had been carefully managed affairs, staff positions that kept him close to headquarters and far from the kind of firefights that forged genuine warriors. He commanded respect through rank rather than earning it through deeds, and his interactions with subordinates carried the casual arrogance of someone who had never faced real consequences for failure. The argument at the firing line was escalating, and Lisa could hear Harrison's voice cutting through the morning air with the kind of dismissive tone that suggested someone was about to be publicly humiliated. She moved closer to the window, maintaining the appearance of casual interest while straining to catch the details of what was clearly becoming a confrontation. The target of Harrison's attention was Specialist Sarah Williams, a 22-year-old sniper candidate whose raw talent had impressed everyone except the captain. Williams came from a family of hunters in rural Montana, and she possessed the kind of natural shooting ability that couldn't be taught in any military school. Her problem wasn't lack of skill, it was lack of political awareness in an environment where knowing when to defer to authority mattered more than actual competence. Williams had apparently made the mistake of questioning one of Harrison's training techniques, suggesting an alternative approach based on her own experience with long-range shooting. In Harrison's world, such challenges from junior enlisted personnel bordered on insubordination, regardless of their technical merit. Lisa watched through the window as the captain's face reddened with the kind of anger that came from having expertise questioned by someone he considered beneath consideration. The confrontation was drawing attention from across the training facility. Other instructors were gathering, their expressions suggesting they were more interested in watching a junior soldier get dressed down than in addressing any legitimate training issue. This was how Fort Braxton maintained its hierarchy, through public demonstrations of power that reminded everyone of their place in the chain of command. Lisa felt her jaw tighten as she watched Harrison tower over Williams, his voice carrying clearly through the morning air. The captain was making an example of the young specialist, using her as a teaching tool for the other students about the dangers of overstepping boundaries. His words were carefully chosen to humiliate without crossing into actionable harassment, the kind of professional cruelty that left no fingerprints but destroyed confidence and crushed potential. The shed's door opened with a squeal of hinges that hadn't seen oil in months, and Master Sergeant Bradley stepped inside, his expression grim with the look of someone who had witnessed the confrontation outside. Bradley's relationship with Harrison was complicated by the realities of military hierarchy. The captain outranked him technically, but the Master Sergeant's 3 decades of experience commanded a different kind of respect among the enlisted personnel. Bradley approached Lisa's workstation with the deliberate stride of someone who had made a decision he wasn't entirely comfortable with. His eyes met hers for a moment before shifting to the window that offered a clear view of the ongoing drama at the firing line. When he spoke, his voice carried the measured tone of someone choosing his words carefully. "Lisa," he said quietly, "that scope giving you any trouble?" His question was casual enough to pass for normal conversation, but Lisa heard the undertone of something deep. Bradley had been watching her work for 3 years, and she suspected he had noticed things that others missed: the way she handled precision instruments with uncommon familiarity, the technical knowledge that exceeded what any maintenance manual could provide, the unconscious expertise that occasionally surfaced despite her careful efforts to remain unremarkable. "Nothing I can't handle, Sergeant," Lisa replied, her voice steady despite the tension building in her chest. "Adjustment mechanism had some wear, but it's serviceable now. Should hold 0 through whatever you need it to do." She handed him the reassembled scope, noting how his experienced hands tested the adjustment knobs with the kind of familiarity that came from decades of depending on such equipment. Bradley nodded approvingly before glancing back toward the window. Outside, Harrison was still making his point at Williams's expense, his voice carrying the kind of public authority that brooked no argument. The crowd of observers had grown larger, Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Drawn by the promise of witnessing someone's humiliation and the vicarious satisfaction that came from not being the target themselves. "That's a good kid out there," Bradley said eventually, his words carefully neutral but his meaning clear. "Williams has real potential if she gets the right kind of training. Problem is, some folks around here seem more interested in maintaining pecking orders than developing talent." His eyes found Lisa's again, and she saw something in them that suggested the Master Sergeant understood more about her situation than he had previously let on. The implication hung in the air between them like gunsmoke. Bradley knew that Williams was getting railroaded by an officer whose ego couldn't tolerate being challenged by someone with actual skill. He also knew that Lisa possessed knowledge that could help the young specialist, if she were willing to risk exposure. The question was whether Lisa was prepared to emerge from the shadows she had so carefully constructed around herself. Before Lisa could respond, the sound of applause erupted from the firing line, the kind of slow, mocking clapping that accompanied public humiliation rather than genuine achievement. Through the window she could see Harrison gesturing toward the 1,000-yard range with theatrical flourish, his words carrying clearly through the morning air as he set up what was clearly intended to be the final act of Williams's degradation. "Since Specialist Williams seems to think she knows better than her instructors," Harrison announced to his assembled audience, "perhaps she'd like to demonstrate her superior marksmanship for all of us. We have a little challenge set up that's been stumping our best marksmen for weeks. Maybe our expert from Montana can show us how it's done." Lisa's blood turned to ice as she recognized the setup. Harrison was pointing toward the impossible shot, a target system that Fort Braxton had installed as a training aid but that no one had ever successfully engaged. The challenge required hitting a moving target at 1,000 yards while threading the bullet through narrow openings in 3 separate buildings, accounting for wind drift and timing variables that pushed human capability beyond its normal limit. The shot had become something of a legend at Fort Braxton, attempted by dozens of elite marksmen and universally declared impossible by everyone who tried it. The target moved at 15 miles per hour along a predetermined track, visible through aligned windows for exactly 3 seconds before disappearing behind the next obstacle. Wind conditions at the 1,000-yard mark rarely dropped below 20 miles per hour, creating lateral drift that required calculations beyond what most shooters could manage in real time. Harrison knew exactly what he was doing. By challenging Williams to attempt the impossible shot, he was setting her up for spectacular public failure that would end any questions about his authority. The young specialist would miss, everyone missed, and her humiliation would serve as a lesson to anyone else who might consider challenging established hierarchies at Fort Braxton. Williams stood frozen at the firing line, her face pale with the realization that she was trapped in a no-win situation. Refuse the challenge and she would be labeled a coward who talked big, but couldn't deliver. Accept it and she would fail publicly, providing Harrison with the perfect capstone to her humiliation. Either way, her reputation at Fort Braxton would be destroyed, and her potential would be buried beneath the weight of institutional mockery. Lisa watched the scene unfold with growing anger that threatened to break through 3 years of carefully maintained emotional control. She had built her exile on the principle of avoiding attention, of staying invisible until she could figure out how to reclaim some version of the life that had been stolen from her. But watching Williams being set up for destruction by a mediocre officer who confused rank with competence was awakening feelings that Lisa thought she had successfully buried. Bradley sensed the change in her demeanor, his experienced eyes noting the subtle shift in her posture and the tightening of her jaw that suggested internal struggle. The Master Sergeant had seen enough combat to recognize the moment when someone was deciding whether to stay hidden or step into the light, regardless of consequences. "That's not right," he said quietly, his words carrying the weight of moral authority that came from 3 decades of service. "That kid doesn't deserve to be destroyed because she had the courage to speak up. Sometimes the system needs people who are willing to challenge it, even when it's dangerous." His words hit Lisa like physical blows, each one resonating with memories of her own destruction at the hands of officers who had chosen personal advancement over truth. She thought about the classified mission that had gone wrong, about Marcus Rivera's betrayal, about the court-martial that had stripped away everything she had worked to achieve. She thought about 3 years of hiding, of watching lesser marksmen attempt shots she could make with her eyes closed, of letting mediocrity triumph because fighting back seemed too dangerous. But mostly she thought about the young specialist who was about to have her dreams crushed by a system that rewarded conformity over competence, and she felt something long dormant beginning to stir in her chest. Outside, Harrison was making a show of checking his watch, building dramatic tension as Williams stood paralyzed at the firing line. The crowd had grown larger, drawn by the promise of witnessing either an impossible achievement or spectacular failure.
Phones were appearing in hands ready to capture whatever happened next for posterity and social media distribution. Lisa's hands stilled on the workbench as she watched the scene unfold, her mind automatically calculating wind conditions, target timing and ballistic variables with the kind of unconscious precision that had once made her the most feared sniper in Delta Force. The shot was difficult, perhaps the most challenging precision engagement she had ever seen, but it wasn't impossible. Not for someone who understood how to make physics bend to human will rather than accepting its apparent limitation. The question was whether Lisa Chen was ready to let Staff Sergeant Lisa Martinez emerge from 3 years of carefully constructed death, and whether she was prepared to face whatever consequences might follow from stepping back into the light. Through the window, Williams looked toward the maintenance shed with desperate eyes, as if sensing that salvation might exist somewhere beyond her current nightmare. For just a moment, their gazes met across the distance, and Lisa saw in the young specialist's face the same determination that had once driven her own pursuit of excellence, before betrayal and false accusations had taught her that competence could be as dangerous as cowardice. Bradley cleared his throat softly, breaking the spell that held Lisa frozen between her past and present selves. When she looked at him, she saw understanding in his weathered features, along with something that might have been. Sometimes, he said carefully, the right person shows up at exactly the right moment to do what needs doing. Question is whether they're willing to pay the price for standing up when it matters. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Lisa felt the weight of 3 years pressing down on her shoulders. She could stay hidden, let Williams fail, and maintain the safety of anonymity that had protected her since her exile began. Or she could step forward, reveal capabilities that would shatter her carefully constructed cover, and face whatever storms might follow. Outside, Harrison was calling for silence as Williams approached the firing line with the unsteady gait of someone walking toward execution. The impossible shot waited in the distance, its challenges multiplying with each gust of wind that swept across the 1,000-yard range. In seconds, the confrontation would reach its climax, and Lisa's window for action would close forever. Her decision, when it came, surprised even her. Lisa Chen began walking toward the door. The maintenance shed door swung shut behind Lisa with a finality that echoed through her bones. Each step toward the firing line felt like walking backward through time, toward a version of herself she had spent 3 years learning to forget. The morning air carried the familiar scent of gun oil and cordite, smells that once meant purpose and belonging, but now triggered memories she kept locked behind walls of deliberate routine. The crowd parted as she approached, their conversations dying into curious whispers. Lisa Chen, the quiet maintenance technician who fixed their scopes and cleaned their rifles, was walking toward the precision range with the kind of measured stride that suggested purpose beyond casual observation. Master Sergeant Bradley followed at a discreet distance, his expression unreadable but his presence somehow reassuring in the growing tension of the moment. Captain Harrison stood at the center of the gathering like a predator enjoying the hunt, his attention focused entirely on Sarah Williams as she struggled with the weight of an impossible choice. The rifle in Williams's hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the kind of emotional overload that came from being publicly cornered by someone in authority. Lisa recognized the expression on the young specialist's face, the desperate look of someone realizing that competence meant nothing when politics and power decided outcome. As Lisa drew closer, fragments of memory began bleeding through the carefully constructed barriers she had built around her past. The courthouse in Virginia where her career had died, the gavel falling like thunder as the judge announced her discharge. The look in Marcus Rivera's eyes as he testified against her, selling her honor for promises of advancement and immunity from prosecution. The weight of false accusations that had transformed her from decorated warrior into disgraced exile. The official story had been clean and convenient. Staff Sergeant Lisa Martinez, Delta Force sniper, had disobeyed direct orders during Operation Desert Wind, compromising mission security and leading to the deaths of 3 civilians in a targeted compound. The evidence had been carefully manufactured: radio transcripts that painted her as reckless, witness testimony from Rivera that portrayed her as unstable, forensic analysis that supported a narrative of negligence and insubordination. What the court-martial had refused to hear was the truth. Rivera had been feeding intelligence to Taliban commanders for 18 months, selling targeting information and mission details for payments that funded his gambling addiction and cocaine habit. When Lisa discovered encrypted communications on his equipment during a routine maintenance check, she had followed protocol and reported the security breach to her commanding officer. That decision had sealed her fate. Rivera's network of corruption reached deeper into the command structure than anyone suspected, including Colonel David Murphy, the base commander whose own financial irregularities made him vulnerable to blackmail. Rather than risk exposure, Murphy had chosen to eliminate the threat Lisa represented by turning her into the scapegoat for Rivera's crimes. The frame-up had been masterfully executed. Radio logs were altered to show unauthorized communications during the failed mission. Equipment manifests were modified to suggest Lisa had improperly handled classified materials. Most damaging of all, Rivera himself had provided testimony that painted her as a loose cannon whose psychological instability made her dangerous to unit cohesion. Lisa's defense had crumbled against the weight of manufactured evidence and coordinated perjury. Her own commanding officer, General Patricia Stone, had been deployed to Africa before the court-martial began, leaving Lisa without the one witness who could have testified to her character and competence. By the time Stone learned what was happening, the verdict had been rendered and Lisa had disappeared into the civilian world with a dishonorable discharge that made her unemployable in any field requiring security clearance. The irony was that Rivera's betrayal had continued after Lisa's exit. 3 more operations had been compromised before military intelligence finally traced the leaks to their actual source. Rivera had been found dead in his quarters 18 months ago, officially from a drug overdose, but more likely from a bullet provided by his Taliban contacts who no longer needed his service. Murphy had quietly transferred to a desk job in the Pentagon, his career intact but his reputation forever tainted among those who knew the truth. Lisa had learned about these developments through carefully maintained contacts in the special operations community, former teammates who refused to believe the official narrative but lacked the evidence to challenge it publicly. The knowledge that her accusations had been proven correct brought no satisfaction. Vindication meant nothing when it came too late to restore what had been stolen. Now walking toward a confrontation that would expose everything she had worked to hide, Lisa felt the weight of those memories pressing against her chest like physical objects. The crowd around the firing line had grown larger as word spread through Fort Braxton's communication network. Phones were emerging from pockets, ready to capture whatever was about to unfold for distribution across social media platforms that thrived on military drama. Harrison noticed her approach with the casual dismissiveness he reserved for support personnel, his attention still focused primarily on Williams and the psychological pressure he was applying through public humiliation. When Lisa stopped at the edge of the firing line, he glanced at her with mild irritation, as if her presence somehow disrupted the carefully orchestrated theater of his dominance display. "Problem with your equipment, Chen?" Harrison asked, his tone carrying the condescending patience of someone addressing a subordinate whose interruption was barely tolerable. "The range is closed for training exercises right now, so whatever maintenance issues you have will need to wait until we're finished here." Lisa met his gaze steadily, noting the way his eyes failed to recognize anything beyond her maintenance coveralls and civilian contractor status. To Harrison, she was furniture, functional when needed, but essentially invisible when not actively serving his purposes. The captain had no idea that he was looking at someone whose skills exceeded his own by orders of magnitude, whose experience in actual combat operations made his carefully managed deployments look like training exercise. "No equipment problems, Captain," Lisa replied, her voice carrying the neutral tone she had perfected during 3 years of hiding in plain sight. "I was wondering if Specialist Williams might benefit from some technical consultation before attempting her shot. Sometimes fresh perspective can help with challenging engagements." The suggestion hit Harrison like a personal insult, his face flushing with the kind of anger that came from having authority questioned by someone he considered beneath consideration. Around the firing line, conversation stopped as soldiers sensed the shift in atmospheric pressure that preceded confrontation. Williams looked up from her rifle with something approaching hope, as if rescue might be possible even from unexpected coordinates. Harrison stepped closer to Lisa, using his height advantage to create physical intimidation while maintaining the appearance of professional interaction. His voice dropped to the kind of controlled intensity that suggested barely contained fury at having his authority challenged by a maintenance worker. "Chen, I think you've forgotten your place here," he said, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. "This is a training exercise for qualified special operations personnel, not a mechanics workshop where amateurs can offer unsolicited advice. I suggest you return to your tools and let real soldiers handle real soldier work." The insult hung in the air like gun smoke, drawing appreciative chuckles from Harrison's supporters and uncomfortable silence from those who recognized the casual cruelty for what it was. Lisa felt the familiar surge of anger that had once motivated her to pursue excellence despite institutional barriers, the burning desire to prove that competence mattered more than credentials or political connection. Around the firing line, the crowd pressed closer, sensing that the morning's entertainment was evolving beyond simple harassment of a junior enlisted soldier. Something about the maintenance technician's steady composure suggested that Harrison might have miscalculated his target, though none of them could have predicted just how dramatically the captain was about to learn the dangers of underestimating quiet competence. Master Sergeant Bradley moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who had spent decades navigating military politics without compromising his principles. His position at Fort Braxton was unique, senior enough to command respect from junior officers, experienced enough to remember when competence mattered more than connections, and respected enough to speak truth to authority when circumstances demanded. Captain Bradley said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that came from 3 decades of special operations experience, "Perhaps we should consider all available resources before dismissing them. Chen here has extensive experience with precision rifle systems, and her technical knowledge might provide valuable insights for the specialist to test." The intervention was carefully phrased to avoid direct challenge to Harrison's authority while opening space for Lisa to demonstrate capabilities that the captain couldn't possibly suspect.
Bradley's endorsement carried weight among the assembled soldiers, many of whom had worked with him long enough to trust his judgment even when they didn't understand his reasoning. Harrison's expression darkened further as he realized that his simple dominance display was becoming complicated by unexpected variables. The captain prided himself on controlling narrative and outcome through careful management of circumstances, and Bradley's intervention threatened to introduce elements beyond his ability to predict or manipulate. "Fine," Harrison said finally, his tone suggesting grudging tolerance rather than genuine acceptance. "If Chen thinks she has something useful to contribute, she can share her wisdom with all of us. But when Williams fails this shot, I don't want to hear any excuses about inadequate preparation or insufficient guidance." The challenge was clear. Harrison was allowing Lisa to advise Williams, but he expected that advice to prove worthless when confronted with the impossible demands of the shot itself. In the captain's worldview, maintenance personnel possessed narrow technical knowledge but lacked the comprehensive understanding necessary for complex tactical applications. Lisa's inevitable failure would reinforce established hierarchies while providing additional entertainment for the crowd. Lisa approached Williams at the firing line with measured steps, noting how the young specialist's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her rifle. The weapon was a standard M24 sniper rifle, capable of exceptional accuracy in skilled hands but demanding perfect technique to achieve its potential. Williams had obviously received competent training in basic marksmanship, but the shot Harrison had challenged her to attempt required knowledge that went far beyond anything taught in conventional military school. The target system itself was a masterpiece of engineering designed to test human capability at its absolute limits. A steel plate approximately 18 inches square moved along a predetermined track at 15 miles per hour, passing behind 3 separate buildings at precisely timed intervals. The shooter had exactly 3 seconds of visibility as the target aligned with windows cut through each structure, requiring split-second timing and mathematical precision to achieve successful engagement. Wind conditions at the 1,000-yard mark varied constantly, but rarely dropped below 20 miles per hour during daylight hours. The crosswind would push any bullet several feet off course without proper compensation, requiring real-time calculations that accounted for projectile ballistics, atmospheric conditions, and target movement vectors simultaneously. Most importantly, the shooter had to anticipate where the target would be when the bullet arrived, leading the moving plate by distances that varied with each atmospheric condition. Lisa studied the range through eyes that had once tracked Taliban commanders across Afghan mountainsides, automatically calculating variables that would determine success or failure. The shot was technically possible, but it demanded the kind of instinctive understanding that came from years of practical application, rather than classroom instruction. Williams possessed raw talent, but she lacked the experience necessary to integrate all the factors into successful execution. More importantly, Lisa realized that Williams was approaching the challenge with the wrong mindset entirely. The young specialist was thinking about the shot as a test of marksmanship, when it was actually a problem of applied physics that happened to involve a rifle. Success required understanding the target system's mechanical timing, calculating wind drift vectors, and predicting atmospheric changes over the bullet's 3-second flight time. "Williams," Lisa said quietly, positioning herself so their conversation couldn't be overheard by Harrison's supporters, "tell me what you see when you look at that target system." The specialist studied the distant range through her rifle scope before responding with the kind of technical analysis that had impressed her instructors, but missed the deeper implications of the challenge she faced. Moving target approximately 18 inches square, traveling at roughly 15 miles per hour through 3 aligned openings, Williams recited. Distance to target is 1,000 yards, with significant crosswind affecting bullet trajectory. Visibility window appears to be 3 seconds maximum before target disappears behind next obstacle. The answer was technically correct but strategically incomplete, focusing on mechanical details while missing the systematic relationships that would determine success or failure. Lisa recognized the limitations of conventional training that taught students to see individual variables, rather than understanding how those variables interacted to create emergent complexity. "Now tell me what you don't see," Lisa prompted, her voice carrying the patient tone of someone who understood that teaching was more valuable than showing off. "What factors are you not accounting for that will affect your shot placement?" Williams frowned as she studied the range again, this time looking for elements that her initial analysis had missed. Lisa watched as the young specialist's expression changed from confidence to uncertainty as she began recognizing the true scope of the challenge Harrison had set for her. "The target timing isn't random," Williams said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in her voice. "It's mechanical, which means the intervals are consistent, but the starting point varies depending on when the system is activated. Wind conditions change constantly at different elevations between here and the target. The bullet's flight time means I need to aim where the target will be, not where it is when I better," Lisa acknowledged, noting how Williams's analytical mind was beginning to grasp the complexity she was facing. "But there are still variables you haven't considered. What happens to bullet trajectory as it passes through those building openings? How do temperature differentials affect projectile stability over a 1,000-yard flight path? Most importantly, how do you integrate all these factors into a single solution when you only have seconds to execute?" The questions hit Williams like physical blows as she realized that her conventional training had prepared her for straightforward long-range shooting, but not for the kind of multivariable problem that Harrison had presented. Around the firing line, soldiers were growing restless as the consultation extended beyond what they had expected, their phones still recording every moment for later analysis and distribution. Harrison checked his watch with theatrical impatience, his body language suggesting that he was prepared to end the demonstration if it continued much longer. The captain had expected Williams to fail quickly and spectacularly, providing him with the perfect capstone to her humiliation. Instead, the maintenance technician's involvement was creating complications that threatened to diminish the impact of his carefully orchestrated lesson. "Time's up, ladies," Harrison announced loudly enough for the entire crowd to hear. If Chen's technical expertise is going to save the day, now would be an excellent time to demonstrate how maintenance manual theory translates into actual performance. The challenge was unmistakable. Harrison was calling Lisa's bluff, demanding that she either produce results or admit that her intervention had been meaningless. The captain was confident that Williams would miss the shot regardless of whatever advice she had received, and he was prepared to use that failure to reinforce his authority while simultaneously discrediting any future challenges to his method. Lisa looked at Williams one final time, seeing in the young specialist's face the same determination that had once driven her own pursuit of excellence. Despite institutional obstacles, the shot Harrison had demanded was cruel in its impossibility, designed to destroy confidence rather than build capability. But Lisa had learned something during her years in Delta Force that no amount of conventional training could teach. Sometimes the only way to win was to change the rules of the game entirely. "What I'm about to tell you," Lisa said quietly, positioning herself so her words couldn't be overheard by the watching crowd, "isn't in any manual you've ever read. This shot isn't about marksmanship. It's about understanding that physics is a tool, not a limitation. Are you willing to trust me completely for the next 60 seconds? Williams met her eyes with the desperate courage of someone who had nothing left to lose, and Lisa saw in that gaze the reflection of her own younger self, standing at the edge of impossibility and choosing to jump rather than surrender to other people's limitations. "Yes," Williams whispered, her voice carrying the absolute conviction that came from recognizing salvation when it appeared, even from unexpected sources. Lisa smiled for the first time in 3 years, feeling something long dormant beginning to stir in her chest as Staff Sergeant Lisa Martinez prepared to emerge from the shadows that Lisa Chen had so carefully constructed around her exile. The impossible shot was about to become possible, and Harrison's world was about to learn that some ghosts refused to stay buried. The wind shifted across Fort Braxton's 1,000-yard range like a living thing, carrying with it the weight of 3 years' worth of buried truths and carefully hidden capabilities. Lisa felt the atmospheric pressure change against her skin.
her body automatically cataloging variables that most marksmen never learn to recognize. Barometric shifts that would affect bullet trajectory, thermal layers that created invisible turbulence, electromagnetic fluctuations from the base's communication arrays that could subtly influence precision electronics. Williams stood at the firing line with her rifle shouldered, the weapon trembling almost imperceptibly as she fought to control breathing that had become shallow with anticipation. Around them, the crowd had grown silent with the kind of expectant tension that preceded either spectacular failure or impossible achievement. Captain Harrison watched from 20 feet away, his expression confident in the certainty that he was about to witness confirmation of his worldview, that maintenance personnel existed to service weapons, not to understand them. "Listen carefully," Lisa whispered, positioning herself so close to Williams that their conversation remained private despite the dozens of phones recording every moment. "The target system activates in 30-second intervals, but there's a mechanical delay built into the timing sequence. Count 7 seconds after the activation signal before the plate begins moving. That gives you exactly 13 seconds to acquire, calculate, and engage." Williams nodded, her grip on the rifle adjusting automatically as she processed the information. Lisa noted the subtle changes in the specialist's posture, the way her breathing began to deepen and regularize as training took over from anxiety. The young woman possessed natural shooting ability that couldn't be taught, but she lacked the experience necessary to trust her instincts when confronted with variables beyond conventional training. "The wind is your ally, not your enemy," Lisa continued, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had made impossible shots under conditions that would paralyze lesser marksmen. "Feel how it moves across your skin. The gusts aren't random. They follow patterns based on the building configuration and terrain features. Right now we have a steady crosswind from the southeast at approximately 22 miles per hour, with thermal drafts creating vertical components every 15 seconds. As she spoke, Lisa's mind automatically processed atmospheric data with the kind of unconscious precision that had once made her legendary among Delta Force operators. The morning sun was creating convection currents that would affect bullet flight in ways that ballistic computers couldn't calculate, while electromagnetic interference from the base's radar installations would introduce variables that existed beyond the scope of conventional marksmanship training. Williams tried to absorb the information, but Lisa could see confusion growing in the specialist's eyes as the complexity of the shot became apparent. The young woman had been trained to think about long-range shooting as a matter of proper technique and ballistic calculation, but the challenge Harrison had presented required understanding that went far beyond mechanical precision into the realm of applied physics and intuitive timing. "You're thinking too hard," Lisa said quietly, recognizing the paralysis that came from trying to consciously process variables that needed to be felt rather than calculated. "This shot isn't about mathematics, it's about becoming part of the system instead of fighting against the rifle, the target, the wind, the timing, they're all connected. Your job is to find the harmony and ride it to impact." The advice sounded mystical rather than practical, but Lisa knew from experience that the most challenging shots required transcending technical knowledge to achieve something approaching artistic expression. The impossible shot demanded not just precision but perfect integration of human capability with environmental conditions, creating a moment of synthesis where physics bent to human will rather than imposing absolute limitation. Around the firing line, Harrison was growing impatient with the extended consultation, his body language suggesting that he was prepared to end the demonstration if it continued much longer. The captain had expected Williams to fail quickly and publicly, providing him with the perfect conclusion to her humiliation. Instead, the maintenance technician's involvement was creating delay and uncertainty that threatened to diminish the impact of his carefully orchestrated lesson. "Time to wrap this up, Chen," Harrison called out, his voice carrying across the range with the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "Either Williams takes her shot now, or we move on to training exercises that don't waste everyone's morning with impossible demonstration." The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge, forcing Lisa to make a decision that would determine not just Williams's fate but her own carefully constructed future. She could step back, let the specialist attempt the shot with conventional training, and watch inevitable failure confirm Harrison's authority while preserving her own anonymity. Or she could cross a line that would expose capabilities she had spent 3 years hiding, risking everything she had built in exile for the chance to prove that competence mattered more than rank. Williams looked at her with desperate eyes, recognizing that whatever advice she was about to receive would determine whether she walked away from the firing line with dignity intact or with her confidence shattered beyond repair. The young specialist had shown courage in challenging Harrison's teaching methods, but courage alone wouldn't be enough to achieve what dozens of elite marksmen had declared impossible. Lisa felt time compressing around her as memories of her own destruction flooded back. The courtroom where her career had died, the manufactured evidence that had painted her as reckless and unstable, the moment when she realized that institutional power could trump individual truth with surgical precision. She had spent 3 years learning to live with injustice, but watching Williams face the same kind of systematic destruction awakened feelings that exile had failed to extinguish. "Give me the rifle," Lisa said quietly, the words emerging from some place deeper than conscious decision. The statement was barely audible, but Williams heard it with perfect clarity, her eyes widening as she understood what the maintenance technician was offering to do. The crowd stirred as Williams stepped back from the firing line, confusion rippling through the assembled soldiers as they tried to understand why a specialist was yielding her position to support personnel. Harrison's expression shifted from impatience to outright disbelief as he realized that the maintenance technician intended to attempt the shot herself, violating every protocol that separated qualified personnel from civilian contractors. "Chen, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Harrison demanded, his voice sharp with authority and growing alarm. "You're not qualified to handle precision rifle systems, and you certainly don't have authorization to fire on a military range. Step away from that weapon immediately before this situation gets completely out of hand." But Lisa was already settling into the shooting position with movements so fluid and automatic that they seemed choreographed rather than spontaneous. Her body found the proper angles without conscious thought, muscle memory from thousands of hours in similar positions, guiding her into perfect alignment with the target system. The rifle felt familiar in her hands despite 3 years away from precision shooting, its weight and balance triggering responses that training had burned into her nervous system. Around the firing line, conversations died into stunned silence as soldiers recognized something in Lisa's posture that contradicted everything they thought they knew about her capabilities. Master Sergeant Bradley watched with growing understanding, pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place as he observed movements that spoke of experience far beyond what any maintenance manual could provide. Harrison started forward, clearly intending to physically remove Lisa from the firing line before the situation spiraled completely beyond his control. But Bradley intercepted the captain with the kind of calm authority that came from 3 decades of special operations experience, his weathered hand settling on Harrison's arm with gentle but unmistakable firmness. "Let's see what she can do, Captain," Bradley said quietly, his voice carrying undertones that suggested the Master Sergeant knew more about the situation than he had previously revealed. "Sometimes the most interesting lessons come from unexpected sources, and I have a feeling we're about to learn something that isn't covered in any training manual." The intervention stopped Harrison mid-stride, his face cycling through confusion and anger as he realized that his authority was being challenged by someone whose rank and experience made direct confrontation politically dangerous. Bradley's suggestion sounded reasonable on the surface, but the captain sensed deeper currents that he couldn't identify or control. Lisa ignored the drama unfolding around her, her attention focused entirely on the target system and the variables that would determine success or failure. Through the rifle scope, she could see the steel plate in its starting position, waiting for the activation signal that would begin its precisely timed journey through the window sequence. The distance to target was exactly 1,047 yards. She could tell by the way atmospheric distortion affected the image quality and the subtle parallax shift between foreground and background elements. Wind conditions were more complex than most marksmen would recognize, with multiple layers of air movement creating 3-dimensional turbulence that changed constantly as thermal currents interacted with the base's building configuration. Lisa felt the patterns against her skin, her body reading atmospheric data with the kind of sensitivity that came from years of depending on such information for mission success and personal survival. The rifle itself was well maintained but not optimized for the kind of precision the shot demanded. Williams had done her best with standard military equipment, but the scope's tracking mechanism showed microscopic wear that would affect repeatability, and the barrel harmonics suggested a weapon that had seen extensive use without proper stress relief. Lisa made mental adjustments for these factors, her mind automatically compensating for mechanical limitations that would remain invisible to conventional diagnostic procedure. Most importantly, she could see the target system's timing mechanisms with clarity that came from understanding engineering principles rather than simply observing surface behavior. The activation sequence wasn't random. It followed mechanical patterns that created predictable intervals once you understood the underlying logic. Lisa had spent enough time maintaining similar systems to recognize the servo motor characteristics and gear ratios that controlled target movement. The activation signal came as a sharp electronic tone that cut across the range like a blade. Lisa began her count, feeling time dilate around her as everything except the shot itself faded into background noise. 7 seconds for mechanical delay, then the target would begin moving at precisely 15.3 miles per hour along its predetermined track. Around her, the crowd held its breath as they watched a maintenance technician prepare to attempt what elite marksmen had declared impossible. Phones captured every moment, recording what everyone expected to be either spectacular failure or inexplicable success. Harrison stood frozen between disbelief and growing alarm, his worldview beginning to crack as he witnessed capabilities that shouldn't exist in someone he had dismissed as support personnel. At 7 seconds, Lisa felt rather than saw the target begin its journey, her mind automatically tracking its position even though it remained invisible behind the first building. The plate would travel 93 feet before emerging into the first window, visible for exactly 2.7 seconds before disappearing behind the next obstacle. Bullet flight time at current atmospheric conditions would be 3.1 seconds, requiring her to fire before the target became visible if she hoped to achieve impact during its brief window of vulnerability. This was where conventional marksmanship failed and something approaching art began. Lisa couldn't see her target when she needed to fire, couldn't verify wind conditions at the impact point, couldn't make final adjustments based on visual confirmation. The shot demanded absolute trust in calculations performed at unconscious levels, faith in capabilities that 3 years of exile had failed to diminish. At 12 seconds, Lisa's finger found the trigger with the gentleness of a lover's touch, applying pressure so gradually that the rifle seemed to fire itself rather than being forced into discharge. The weapon's recoil felt familiar against her shoulder, a comfortable reminder of skills that had never truly been forgotten despite years of deliberate suppression. 308 caliber bullet left the muzzle at 2,800 feet per second, beginning a journey that would test every calculation Lisa had made about wind drift, target timing and ballistic performance. For 3 eternal seconds, the projectile flew through air that twisted and shifted with invisible complexity, following a trajectory that curved through 3 dimensions as atmospheric forces pulled it away from its intended path. Through the rifle scope, Lisa watched the target appear in the first window right on schedule, the steel plate moving with mechanical precision through the narrow opening that framed it against the distant building. The timing was perfect, the calculations correct, but success still depended on variables that existed beyond human control: microscopic variations in bullet manufacturing, atmospheric conditions that changed between heartbeats, electromagnetic interference that could deflect precision electronics by fractions of degree. The impact came as a sharp metallic ring that carried clearly across the 1,000-yard range, the distinctive sound of hardened steel striking hardened steel at high velocity. Through her scope, Lisa saw the target plate swing backward with the unmistakable motion that indicated direct center mass impact, the kind of perfect shot placement that professional marksmen spent entire careers trying to achieve. Around the firing line, silence stretched like a physical thing as the crowd processed what they had just witnessed. The maintenance technician had not only hit the impossible target, she had achieved a kind of precision that bordered on supernatural, threading a bullet through mechanical timing and atmospheric chaos with surgical accuracy that defied rational explanation. Harrison stood frozen with his mouth open, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion and something approaching terror as he realized that his worldview had just been shattered by someone he had dismissed as beneath consideration. The captain's entire identity was built on the assumption that rank corresponded to capability, that formal training determined competence, that institutional hierarchy reflected actual merit. Phones across the firing line captured the moment of impact and its aftermath, recording not just the impossible shot but Harrison's stunned reaction and the crowd's growing realization that they had witnessed something that would be talked about for decades. The video would spread through military networks within hours, carrying with it questions that would force uncomfortable examinations of assumptions about talent, training and the nature of expertise itself. Master Sergeant Bradley approached the firing line with the measured stride of someone who had just seen confirmation of suspicions he had harbored for months. His weathered face showed satisfaction rather than surprise, as if the impossible shot had answered questions rather than creating new mysteries. "Outstanding shooting, Chen," Bradley said quietly, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent range. "That was some of the finest marksmanship I've seen in 30 years of special operations. Mind if I ask where you learned to shoot like that?" The question hung in the air like gun smoke, creating a moment of decision that would determine whether Lisa continued hiding behind her carefully constructed identity, or stepped into the light that would expose everything she had worked to conceal. Around the firing line, dozens of soldiers waited for her answer, their phones still recording every word for posterity and analysis. Harrison finally found his voice, though it emerged as a strangled whisper that carried none of his usual authority. "That's impossible," he said, the words sounding hollow even to himself. Maintenance personnel don't have access to advanced marksmanship training. There has to be some explanation for what just happened. Lisa stood slowly, the rifle still comfortable in her hands as she turned to face the crowd that had gathered to witness her destruction of their fundamental assumptions about competence and capability. For 3 years she had hidden among them as Lisa Chen, the quiet technician who fixed their equipment and stayed invisible. Now with a single shot she had revealed capabilities that would force questions she wasn't prepared to answer. The moment of truth had arrived, and Lisa realized that some secrets were too large to remain buried forever. Staff Sergeant Lisa Martinez was about to emerge from the shadows, and the consequences would ripple far beyond Fort Braxton's firing line. The silence that followed the impossible shot stretched across Fort Braxton like a held breath, broken only by the distant sound of helicopter rotors cutting through morning air. Lisa stood at the firing line with the rifle still balanced in her hands, feeling the weight of dozens of stares as phones captured every angle of her unexpected revelation. The maintenance coveralls that had hidden her for 3 years now felt like a costume she had outgrown, inadequate camouflage for capabilities that could no longer remain concealed. Captain Harrison's face had drained of color, his usual arrogance replaced by the hollow expression of someone whose fundamental assumptions about reality had just been demolished by empirical evidence. He opened his mouth several times as if to speak, but no words emerged that could adequately process what he had witnessed. In his carefully ordered world, maintenance personnel fixed equipment while qualified operators demonstrated expertise, and the boundaries between those roles were supposed to be absolute and unbreachable. The approaching helicopter grew louder, its distinctive sound cutting through the morning air with military precision. Master Sergeant Bradley squinted toward the horizon, his weathered face showing recognition as he identified the aircraft by its engine signature and flight characteristics. The UH-60 Blackhawk bore the markings of Pentagon Transportation Command, its presence at Fort Braxton suggesting that someone with considerable authority was arriving unannounced. The crowd around the firing line began to disperse as soldiers recognized the implications of unexpected high-level visitors. Phones disappeared into pockets as personnel realized that whatever was about to unfold would likely involve classified information and career-ending consequences for anyone who documented it without authorization. Within minutes, the area had cleared except for Harrison, Bradley, Williams, and Lisa herself.
The Black Hawk touched down on the adjacent helipad with textbook precision, its rotors creating dust clouds that swirled across the firing line like desert sand. As the engines wound down, a figure emerged from the passenger compartment with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to commanding immediate attention and absolute respect. General Patricia Stone stepped onto the tarmac wearing dress blues that displayed 30 years of distinguished service across her chest in neat rows of ribbons and decorations. Her silver hair was pulled back in a regulation bun that emphasized the sharp intelligence in her gray eyes, and her presence radiated the kind of authority that came from leading soldiers through actual combat rather than managing them through bureaucratic exercises. Lisa felt her breath catch as she recognized the woman who had once been her commanding officer, mentor, and the closest thing to family she had known in the military. Stone had been deployed to Africa during Lisa's court-martial, unable to testify on behalf of an officer whose character and competence she knew better than anyone else in the chain of command. The general's absence had been one of the many convenient coincidences that had allowed Rivera's conspiracy to succeed. Stone approached the firing line with measured steps, her eyes fixed on Lisa with an intensity that suggested she had been waiting 3 years for this moment. Behind her walked 2 men in civilian suits whose bearing and alertness marked them as either intelligence operatives or military investigators. Their presence suggested that this visit involved more than simple coincidence or routine inspection. The general stopped 10 feet from Lisa, close enough for private conversation but far enough to maintain the formality that military protocol demanded. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of authority backed by absolute certainty, cutting through the morning air with crystalline precision. Staff Sergeant Lisa Martinez, Stone said using the name and rank that had been stripped away 3 years earlier. Your country owes you an apology, compensation, and the full restoration of everything that was stolen from you through corruption and manufactured evidence. The words hit the remaining observers like physical blows. Harrison staggered backward as if struck, his face cycling through disbelief and dawning horror as he realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. Williams stepped closer to Lisa with protective instincts that spoke to her character, while Bradley nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose suspicions had finally been confirmed. Lisa stood motionless as Stone's revelation washed over her, 3 years of careful emotional control threatening to crumble under the weight of vindication she had never dared hope for. The general's words meant that Rivera's conspiracy had finally been exposed, that the truth she had carried alone through exile was now acknowledged by the institution that had destroyed her. Marcus Rivera confessed before his death 18 months ago. Stone continued, her voice carrying the clinical precision of someone delivering intelligence briefing. He provided detailed testimony about the intelligence operation he was running for Taliban commanders, the payments he received for compromising mission security, and the systematic frame-up that made you the scapegoat for his treason. The revelation sent shockwaves through the small group gathered around the firing line. Harrison's mouth worked soundlessly as he processed the implications of having publicly humiliated a decorated war hero whose only crime had been discovering corruption in her own unit. Williams watched with growing understanding as pieces of Lisa's mysterious competence finally fell into place. Colonel David Murphy was arrested this morning at his Pentagon office, Stone announced, her satisfaction evident as she described the downfall of another architect of Lisa's destruction. Federal investigators found encrypted communications proving his participation in Rivera's network, along with financial records showing payments received for suppressing your allegations and facilitating the manufactured evidence used in your court-martial. Lisa felt a strange detachment as she listened to Stone catalog the vindication she had dreamed about for 3 years. The institutional acknowledgement of her innocence should have brought satisfaction or relief, but instead she found herself thinking about the impossible shot she had just made, and the young specialist who had shown courage in challenging authority despite the personal risks involved. The general reached into her jacket and withdrew an envelope sealed with official stamps and military insignia. The restoration paperwork carried the authority of the Secretary of Defense himself, along with presidential authorization for her immediate reinstatement at full rank with back pay and benefit. More importantly, it offered command of the newly formed Precision Marksmanship Training Division, a position that would allow her to shape the next generation of military snipers. Your skills are legendary within the special operations community, Stone said as she offered the envelope to Lisa. The impossible shot you just made will be studied for decades as an example of human capability exceeding theoretical limitation. Delta Force needs instructors who can teach that level of excellence, and you have the opportunity to train operators who will carry your knowledge into future conflict. The offer represented everything Lisa had lost and more: rank, respect, purpose, and the chance to serve her country in a capacity that matched her unique ability. The position would make her one of the most influential instructors in American special operations, with the authority to reshape training programs and develop techniques that would save lives in combat zones around the world. But as Lisa looked at the envelope containing her restoration, she found herself thinking about the past 3 years in ways that surprised her. The exile that had felt like punishment had also taught her lessons about the difference between institutional validation and personal worth. She had learned to find satisfaction in helping others achieve their potential, even when that help remained unrecognized and unrewarded. Williams stepped forward with the courage that had gotten her into trouble with Harrison, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who had witnessed something transformative and wanted to ensure it wasn't lost or forgotten. General, Williams said, her words carefully chosen to avoid insubordination while making her point clear. Sergeant Martinez didn't just make an impossible shot this morning. She taught me that competence matters more than credentials, that skill transcends rank, and that real leadership means lifting others up rather than putting them down. The young specialist intervention drew surprised glances from the assembled group. Harrison looked mortified as he realized that his own failures were being highlighted in front of a general officer, while Bradley nodded approvingly at Williams's courage in speaking truth to authority regardless of personal consequence. Stone studied Williams with the calculating gaze of someone who had spent decades evaluating potential in young soldiers. The general's expression suggested that she was seeing qualities that reminded her of her own early career, when conviction and competence had mattered more than political connections or family influence. "What's your name, specialist?" Stone asked, her tone carrying genuine interest rather than casual dismissal. "Sarah Williams, ma'am," Williams replied, standing at attention with the crisp precision that came from exceptional training and natural discipline. "I've been working towards sniper qualification, but I've learned more about marksmanship in the past hour than I did in 6 months of conventional instruction." Stone's smile suggested that she was seeing connections between present circumstances and future possibilities, patterns that experienced leaders learn to recognize and exploit for the benefit of both individuals and institutions. "General," Lisa said quietly, speaking for the first time since Stone's arrival, "I appreciate the vindication and the opportunity for restoration, but I've learned something during my time in exile that I didn't understand when I was Staff Sergeant Martinez." Stone raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting resistance to an offer that represented complete vindication and professional restoration. The general had anticipated that Lisa would accept immediately,
grateful for the chance to reclaim everything that had been stolen from her through corruption and manufactured evidence. Excellence isn't about rank or recognition, Lisa continued, her voice carrying the calm conviction of someone who had found peace through hard-won wisdom. It's about using your abilities to help others achieve their potential, regardless of whether that service receives institutional acknowledgement or official rewards. The statement hung in the air like a challenge to conventional assumptions about success and achievement. Stone frowned as she processed words that suggested her former protégé had undergone fundamental changes during her years of exile, developing perspectives that complicated what should have been a straightforward restoration process. Lisa, Stone said carefully, "You're talking about walking away from complete vindication and the chance to train the next generation of America's finest marks. This position would give you the authority to reshape special operations training in ways that could save countless lives in future conflict." But Lisa was thinking about her years of watching skilled soldiers being dismissed by officers who confused privilege with competence, about talented individuals whose potential was being wasted by systems that valued conformity over capability. She thought about Williams's courage in challenging authority despite personal risks, and about the dozens of other specialists who might benefit from training that emphasized excellence over hierarchy. The restoration offer represented justice, but it also meant returning to an institution that had proven itself capable of destroying innocence for political convenience. Lisa had learned to find purpose in helping others discover their own capabilities, and she wondered whether that mission might be better served outside traditional military structure. Harrison, who had remained silent during the exchange, finally found his voice as he realized that his own career was hanging in the balance of whatever decision emerged from this confrontation. The captain's future depended on institutional mercy and the hope that his failures would be forgotten rather than becoming examples used to reform training programs. "General Stone," Harrison said, his voice carrying none of its usual arrogance, "I want to acknowledge that my treatment of both Sergeant Martinez and Specialist Williams was unprofessional and inappropriate. I failed to recognize excellence when it was presented to me, and I let personal prejudices cloud my judgment about capability and potential." The apology was clearly motivated by self-preservation rather than genuine remorse, but it represented an acknowledgement of failures that would have remained unrecognized without the morning's dramatic revelation. Stone studied Harrison with the cold gaze of someone deciding whether he represented salvageable potential or irredeemable liability. "Captain Harrison," Stone said eventually, "you will report to the Pentagon Monday morning for reassignment to administrative duties pending completion of leadership training and sensitivity education. Your conduct this morning demonstrated fundamental failures in judgment that make you unsuitable for training assignments involving junior personnel." The punishment was less severe than Harrison deserved but more merciful than he had expected. His career would survive, though his prospects for advancement had been permanently damaged by public demonstration of his inability to recognize competence when it appeared in unexpected forms. Williams watched the exchange with growing understanding of how military politics actually worked, seeing patterns of authority and consequence that weren't covered in any training manual she had studied. The young specialist was learning lessons about leadership and justice that would shape her own approach to command responsibilities in future assignments. But Lisa's attention remained focused on the envelope containing her restoration, weighing the satisfaction of vindication against the possibility of creating something new and potentially more meaningful. The choice would determine not just her own future but the message she sent about the relationship between institutional power and individual worth. The decision, when it came, would surprise everyone present and establish precedent for measuring success in ways that transcended traditional military hierarchies. Lisa Martinez was about to teach her final lesson about the true meaning of victory. Lisa held the restoration envelope in her hands, feeling its weight not just as paper and official seals, but as the culmination of 3 years spent learning to define success without institutional validation. General Stone waited with the patience of someone accustomed to making decisions that shaped careers and altered destinies, while around them the morning air carried the distant sounds of a military base continuing its daily operation, oblivious to the transformation unfolding at the precision rifle range. The choice should have been simple: accept vindication, reclaim her rank, return to the world that had cast her out, and prove that competence eventually triumphed over corruption. But Lisa had discovered something during her exile that Staff Sergeant Martinez had never understood. Sometimes the greatest victory came not from conquering your enemies, but from transcending the need for their approval entirely. "Thank you for this, General," Lisa said quietly, her voice carrying the respect she felt for Stone personally, while maintaining the independence she had cultivated during her years of exile. "The vindication means more than you know. And knowing the truth is finally acknowledged removes a weight I've carried for 3 years. Stone's expression suggested she sensed reluctance in Lisa's tone, a hesitation that the general hadn't anticipated when she authorized the flight to Fort Braxton. The restoration offer represented complete justice from the military's perspective, along with the opportunity to serve in a capacity that matched Lisa's unique capabilities. Refusal seemed inconceivable to someone who had spent decades within institutional structure. But I've learned something about myself during these years that I didn't understand when I was focused on climbing ranks and earning recognition, Lisa continued, carefully returning the envelope to Stone's outstretched hand. Excellence isn't about institutional position. It's about using your abilities to help others discover their own potential, regardless of whether that service receives official acknowledgement. The statement sent ripples of shock through the small group gathered around the firing line. Stone's eyebrows rose with surprise that bordered on disbelief, while Williams stepped closer as if to physically support a decision that defied conventional wisdom about career advancement and personal vindication. Even Master Sergeant Bradley, who had suspected Lisa might choose an unconventional path, seemed startled by her complete rejection of military restoration. Harrison watched the exchange with growing bewilderment, unable to process why anyone would voluntarily reject the kind of vindication and advancement that represented the ultimate validation of military service. In his worldview, rank and official recognition were the only meaningful measures of success, and Lisa's refusal challenged assumptions that formed the foundation of his professional identity. "Lisa," Stone said carefully, her voice carrying the concern of someone who had watched a promising officer make a decision that seemed to contradict rational self-interest. "You're talking about walking away from complete vindication and the chance to shape the future of American Special Operations training. This isn't just about personal recognition. It's about the impact you could have on national security." The appeal was expertly crafted, shifting focus from personal benefits to patriotic duty and the broader implications of Lisa's choice. Stone understood that appeals to service often succeeded where offers of advancement failed, particularly with officers whose motivation transcended individual ambition. But Lisa had spent 3 years watching talented soldiers being dismissed by systems that valued conformity over competence, and she had developed ideas about education and training that diverged significantly from conventional military approaches. Her vision involved creating opportunities for individuals who might never fit traditional molds, but possessed capabilities that deserved recognition and development. "General, I've seen too many people like Specialist Williams being written off by instructors who mistake authority for expertise," Lisa replied, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who had found purpose through hard-won experience. "The military needs institutional change, but sometimes that change happens more effectively from outside the chain of command than from within it." Williams felt a surge of gratitude as she realized that Lisa's decision was partially motivated by the desire to help others who faced similar challenges. The young specialist had witnessed transformative teaching in the space of an hour, learning more about precision shooting and leadership than months of conventional instruction had provided. The possibility that such guidance might become available to others excited her more than any personal advancement. Stone studied Lisa with the calculating gaze of someone who had spent decades evaluating officers and predicting their career trajectory. The general's experience suggested that refusing vindication and restoration usually indicated either emotional instability or fundamental misunderstanding of institutional power. But Lisa's demeanor suggested neither weakness nor confusion. "What exactly are you proposing?" Stone asked finally, her tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than dismissive skepticism. "If you're not returning to active duty, what do you intend to do with capabilities that represent years of taxpayer investment in specialized training?" The question was fair, and Lisa had spent sleepless nights during her exile developing answers that addressed both practical concerns and philosophical principles. Her vision involved creating something new, an institution that combined the best aspects of military training with educational approaches that emphasized individual potential over standardized conformity. "I want to establish a precision marksmanship academy that serves military personnel, law enforcement, and civilians who possess the dedication and character necessary for advanced training," Lisa explained, her words carrying the clarity of someone who had refined her ideas through years of observation and reflection. "The focus would be on excellence rather than politics, capability rather than connections, and developing potential wherever it exists." The concept was ambitious enough to capture Stone's attention while remaining practical enough to seem achievable. Lisa's reputation within the special operations community would attract students and instructors, While her recent demonstration of impossible marksmanship would generate publicity and credibility that money couldn't purchase, Stone considered the proposal with the strategic thinking that had made her one of the military's most effective leaders. An independent academy run by someone of Lisa's caliber could potentially produce training innovations that the military itself could adopt, creating benefits that transcended traditional institutional boundaries. You'd need significant funding, qualified instructors, and facilities capable of supporting advanced training programs, Stone observed, her tone suggesting she was evaluating practical challenges rather than dismissing the concept entirely. Building something like that from scratch would require resources and connections that might be difficult to obtain without institutional support. Lisa smiled for the first time since Stone's arrival, her expression carrying the confidence of someone who had already begun solving the problems that others saw as insurmountable obstacles. The years of exile had taught her to think creatively about resource allocation and partnership development, skills that would prove invaluable in creating educational institutions. I've been developing relationships with private security companies, competitive shooting organizations, and equipment manufacturers who are interested in supporting advanced training programs, Lisa replied, her voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone discussing a vision that had sustained her through difficult times. The demonstration you just witnessed will generate publicity that translates into funding opportunities and partnership possibility. Williams listened with growing excitement as she realized that Lisa's vision might create opportunities for individuals like herself, who possessed talent but lacked traditional credentials or political connection. The academy concept represented meritocracy in its purest form, advancement based on demonstrated capability rather than institutional favoritism or family influence. Stone's expression softened as she recognized the idealism that motivated Lisa's decision, along with the practical wisdom that had shaped her approach to achieving meaningful change. The general had spent enough time in institutional environments to understand both their strengths and limitations, and she could see merit in creating alternatives that emphasize different values. I can't officially endorse your decision, Stone said carefully, her words chosen to maintain institutional neutrality while conveying personal support, but I can acknowledge that the military's loss might become law enforcement's in civilian training's gain. Your capabilities deserve to be shared with people who will appreciate their value. The endorsement was subtle but significant, representing tacit approval from someone whose opinion carried weight throughout the special operations community. Stone's support would open doors and create opportunities that would otherwise remain closed to someone operating outside traditional military structure. Harrison, who had remained silent during the exchange, finally found courage to speak as he realized that the morning's events represented both personal humiliation and potential learning opportunity. His future in the military would be determined by his ability to demonstrate growth and changed perspective following his public failure. Sergeant Martinez, Harrison said, his voice carrying none of its earlier arrogance, I want to apologize not just for my treatment of you today but for the attitude that made such treatment possible. You've taught me that expertise can exist anywhere, and that real leadership means recognizing excellence regardless of where it appears. The apology was more genuine than his earlier attempt at damage control, suggesting that Harrison might actually be capable of learning from his mistakes rather than simply avoiding their consequence. Lisa studied his face for signs of sincerity, noting the genuine embarrassment and growing understanding that replaced his former confidence. Captain, your ability to recognize and admit error shows character that your earlier behavior didn't reveal, Lisa replied, her tone carrying the generosity of someone who had learned to forgive for her own peace rather than others deserve it. Real leadership requires humility, and admitting mistakes is often more valuable than avoiding them. Williams watched the exchange with fascination, observing how Lisa's approach to conflict resolution emphasized education over punishment, growth over revenge. These were leadership lessons that no manual could teach, demonstrated through practical application rather than theoretical discussion. Stone checked her watch with the practiced efficiency of someone whose schedule measured time in minutes rather than hours, her presence at Fort Braxton representing a brief interruption in responsibilities that spanned multiple time zones and operational theater. I need to return to Washington, but I want your contact information, Stone said to Lisa, her tone suggesting that their relationship would continue despite Lisa's rejection of military restoration. The academy you're proposing might benefit from consultation arrangements that don't require official institutional involvement. The offer represented exactly the kind of support Lisa had hoped for. Endorsement and guidance from respected professionals without the constraints that came with formal military affiliation. Stone's willingness to maintain contact suggested that her decision had been respected rather than dismissed as misguided idealism. As the general prepared to depart, Williams approached Lisa with the determination of someone who had made a life-changing decision during the course of a single morning. The young specialist's earlier confidence had been replaced by something deeper: conviction based on witnessed excellence rather than theoretical training. Sergeant Martinez, Williams said, her voice carrying the formality that respect demanded along with the enthusiasm that possibility generated. When you establish your academy, I want to be your first. I've learned more about marksmanship and leadership in the past hour than I did in months of conventional training. The request touched something deeper than professional pride in Lisa's chest. Recognition that her decision to reject institutional restoration was creating opportunities for others who shared her commitment to excellence over advancement. Williams represented the kind of student who would justify the Academy's existence and validate its educational philosophy. I'd be honored to have you as a student, Lisa replied, her words carrying the weight of promise and mutual commitment. But remember that real excellence requires more than instruction. It demands the courage to challenge assumptions and the integrity to help others achieve their potential. Stone's departure involved the same military precision that had characterized her arrival, the Black Hawk lifting off with practiced efficiency while carrying a general whose understanding of leadership had been reinforced by witnessing someone choose principle over advance.
The helicopter's sound faded into distance, leaving the firing line group to process the implications of decisions that would reshape multiple careers. Harrison lingered after the others began to disperse, his expression suggesting someone wrestling with fundamental questions about identity and purpose that extended far beyond immediate career concerns. The captain's humiliation had been public and thorough, but it had also provided him with insights that might ultimately prove more valuable than the advancement he had expected. Sergeant Martinez, Harrison said quietly, his words carrying the hesitation of someone venturing into unfamiliar emotional territory, is there any possibility that someone like me could eventually train at your academy? I realize I have a lot to learn about leadership and recognizing talent, and I think I might benefit from instruction that emphasizes character as much as capability. The question surprised Lisa with its genuine humility and self-awareness, suggesting that Harrison's earlier arrogance might have concealed insecurity rather than reflecting true character. His willingness to acknowledge personal limitations and seek improvement indicated potential for growth that his previous behavior hadn't revealed. Captain, anyone who demonstrates genuine commitment to excellence and willingness to help others achieve their potential will always be welcome, Lisa replied, her tone carrying the generous spirit of someone who had learned to value redemption over revenge. Real leadership requires continuous learning, and the academy will be designed for people who understand that expertise develops through practice rather than position. Master Sergeant Bradley approached as the group continued to dissolve, his weathered face showing satisfaction at witnessing events that confirmed both his faith in Lisa's character and his understanding of military politics. The veteran NCO had spent decades navigating institutional hierarchies while maintaining personal integrity, and he recognized kindred spirit in Lisa's decision. Outstanding choice, Martinez, Bradley said quietly, his words carrying approval that meant more to Lisa than any official commendation could have provided. The military needs people like you, but sometimes you can serve better from outside the institution than from within. Your academy will produce the kind of marksmen and leaders that the service requires. The endorsement from someone of Bradley's experience and reputation provided validation that Lisa's decision represented wisdom rather than idealistic mistake-making. His support would carry weight throughout the special operations community, generating credibility and opportunities that would prove invaluable during the Academy's development phase. As the group finally dispersed and normal training operations resumed at Fort Braxton, Lisa found herself standing alone at the firing line where her transformation from hidden maintenance worker to recognized expert had occurred. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the mist that had provided concealment during her years of exile, while illuminating possibilities that stretched toward horizons she was only beginning to imagine. 6 months later, the Precision Excellence Academy opened its doors in rural Montana, occupying facilities that combined cutting-edge technology with the kind of natural environment that challenged both equipment and operators. Lisa's impossible shot had generated publicity that translated into funding from private security companies, equipment manufacturers, and philanthropic organizations interested in supporting innovative educational approaches. The Academy's first class included Sarah Williams, who had completed her military service and chosen to pursue advanced training rather than conventional career advancement. Her dedication and natural ability made her an ideal example of the Academy's educational philosophy, demonstrating that excellence emerged from commitment rather than credential. Captain Harrison, following completion of leadership training and a year of administrative duties that provided time for reflection and growth, became one of the Academy's first instructor candidates. His transformation from arrogant officer to humble student exemplified the kind of personal development that the Academy existed to foster. The impossible shot that had revealed Lisa's capabilities became the Academy's founding legend, but its real significance lay in the principle it represented, that human potential exceeded apparent limitations when properly understood and developed. Students learned not just marksmanship techniques, but leadership principles that emphasize service over advancement, competence over connections, and the responsibility that came with exceptional ability. General Stone visited occasionally, her presence providing both credibility and connection to military institutions that benefited from the Academy's innovation. The relationship proved mutually beneficial, with the Academy's training methods eventually being adopted by special operations units seeking more effective approaches to developing precision marksmen. Years later, when military historians analyzed the transformation of American marksmanship training, they would trace significant improvements to principles first demonstrated at a small academy in Montana, where a former Delta Force sniper had chosen to measure success by the achievements of her students, rather than the restoration of her own rank. Lisa Chen had disappeared forever on the morning she made an impossible shot, replaced by someone who understood that true victory came not from proving your enemies wrong but from helping others discover the excellence that existed within themselves. The ghost in maintenance coveralls had evolved into something far more powerful, a teacher whose influence would ripple through generations of students who learned that physics was just another limitation waiting to be transcended by human will applied with precision and purpose. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.